You're watching Buzz with Jess Lujan.
Good evening, Guam. I'm Jess Lujan. Welcome to this edition of The Buzz. My in-studio guest this evening is Cynthia Johnson, right?
That
Can I call you Cindy?
correct. Yes, you may.
Great.
Please do.
23 years in the Department of Education as a school health counselor.
That's correct.
You're Cindy Johnson, RN,
That's
registered
correct.
nurse, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And 23 years, not just as being in DOE, but you've been in DOE, most especially down at FQ Sanchez.
The entire time at FQ Sanchez Elementary School.
For 23 years.
That's right, starting my 24th year. I would
tell
like
you,
to.
You help some kids, you help educate kids who are now serving, or are leaders of Guam
Exactly.
and serving in the military and all that. So you go back a long time.
I go back longer than I would like to even think about. Actually, Jesse, thanks.
No, let's go back from your first days to where we're at this point. You started 23 years ago,
Yeah.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now I've heard statements being made that at one point FQ Sanchez had maybe in excess of maybe 200 kids or something like that, and now it's declined to maybe 56, 57 kids, and obviously parents are taking them out of the school because maybe it's not working. Your insight into that.
Well, I've only been there since the 80s, but I can tell you in the 80s we didn't have anywhere near 200 kids. We are pretty maxed out at maybe 120,
Okay.
120 with the size of facility we have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very serving to the community.
Mm-hmm.
That's just about what we need for the community.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, in recent years we have had a decline in that. But what I perceive from my angle is that the problem is parents are not sure the school is going to be stayed open.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to stay open and it's going to be adequately staffed.
Now let me ask you this, because I know when I was serving legislature back in the 27th Guam legislature, and you've been in the department a lot longer than I served actually, but back then there was talk and there was a move to close FQ Sanchez down, and I'm sure you were there, you heard of that move, but was that the first time? I'm sure this wasn't the first time that where efforts were made to close down and actually close down FQ Sanchez. A few years back there was talk and efforts made to close that down, but before that, when you came in 23 years ago, were there efforts to close it down as well?
There were rumors. I'm not sure I'd call them efforts, but
okay.
there were definitely rumors. FQ Sanchez is not worth keeping open. That's what we've heard. That really irritates me. It's too small. It's too much trouble. It's just, when you compare it to the big northern schools, of course size-wise we're never going to be that size, but we feel that we've got a really outstanding village with a really outstanding heritage down there, and we want to keep our little ones at home. Sure, middle school and high school, they can leave the village, that's fine. We've got a historic facility right there to educate them in, and we have had some of the most outstanding staff around to staff it as well. So yes, the rumors were always there, but they have been getting increasingly aggressive over the last few years.
Now let me ask you this, because the argument now is of course that it's about $16,000 per child to educate based on the DOE's holistic budget. Basically that's what it is. Now, when you maxed out about 120, remember years back, remember the 80s first came in, the DOE budget was a lot more than we have now, and it's decreased throughout the years. So back then, it was probably over 20,000 at the time. If you based it on the formula that Mr. Barry Mead is putting out right now, if it's his formula, I'm sure at the time it cost more per child to educate versus now. Was that an argument back then, or was that the rumor back then for the closure of FQ Sanchez?
I would say that it was more ambiguous. It's just more of a bother because we didn't hear so much about the money angle of it. But I'd kind of like to go back to one of the statements you just made, which was a budget of $800,000. You know, that is not an accurate number. There's been a lot of inaccurate numbers flown around about FQ Sanchez.
Depends on who you talk to.
Well, it depends on the facts, actually, and who has the facts. Yeah, and who has the facts in front of them. When Barry Mead at the school board meeting said, you need to bring the costs down, there were several of us in the school that asks for staffing pattern, and you know a staffing pattern,
Sure,
that's who
sure.
works there and the salaries they make,
It's
right?
got it all.
Right. Well, we had about 4 people hooked onto our staffing pattern that either no longer worked there or had never worked there. So when we removed them off of there, I think we brought the budget down from maybe 800 and some, close to 900,000 to, I want to say 500 and some thousand.
Okay.
So, I mean, what percentage is that?
Sure,
we brought
sure.
it down a large amount, and I'm not sure it really made that much difference, but they were basing all these comments on incorrect facts of who actually worked there and what kind of salaries they were making.
It depends on how far back I mean, maybe they pulled it, dusted it off the shelf and say, can we look at the staffing pattern back then?
Right. Well, I think what they did, and I think this is common in DOE, that when one teacher goes from one school to another school, for reasons that are convenient for downtown, they leave them on the previous school, which I think is fine if that works for them. You know, there should be no problem with that. On the other hand, there was a problem with that for us because it appeared that we had this bloated budget. And yes, it does cost more probably per child to educate at a smaller school than a larger school. But you take all the small schools in the South, and they're not going to be very much different from our school.
Well, I mean, it looks like the next smallest school is Marisa Martyrs.
I believe they are number 2 for the next smallest school.
At what point are they going to become the smallest school? Or now, if FQ Sanchez remains closed, they're still going to be the smallest school.
I believe that is correct.
And so at what point are they going to say now it's costing now $13,000 per child now to educate, and at what point are they going to be unimmune to closure?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on that. You know, another thing that really hasn't been looked at is how much does it cost to educate someone going to Ukadu, because they have the school that they're paying on. It's not just the teacher's salaries, but you know, that's millions of dollars there, and if you crack that down by student, that's got to be probably more per student than our little school is.
Cindy, don't get me started, because JFK is yet to open. That's a price tag at $201 million over 30 years. So let's do the math on that, right?
Yeah. It just seems to me that we're pretty little to get so much picking on.
There we go. Hey, we're going to take a break and come back. Actually, we're going to open up the phone lines for your calls and views tonight. Talk to Cindy and I, 632-8255 or 632-TALK when we come back.